The Missouri River curved through the valley like a bronze ribbon, whispering secrets to anyone who cared to listen. Along its muddy banks stood a small, two-story tavern built of oak and memory. Locals called it the Whispering Barrel. It was owned by Eli Turner, a man of quiet strength and gentle manners, whose kind eyes carried a grief no one dared to ask about. His late wife, Martha, had passed 2 winters ago, leaving behind only her laughter in the walls and her scent in the roses that grew near the door. Eli ran the tavern alone. Each night, when lamps burned low and the old gramophone hummed its weary tune, something unusual would happen. A mug would slide across the counter, filled to the brim, though no hand had touched it. The regulars laughed nervously, whispering, "Spirits pouring for spirits." But Eli never explained. He simply smiled and said, "The house knows when a man's heart is heavy." And in Missouri Valley, nobody ever questioned that kind of magic. Word spread fast in small towns, and by spring, the tavern had become more than a place to drink. It was a refuge, where widows came to remember, where farmers came to forget, and where lost travelers came to feel seen again. Eli served everyone the same way, with patience and a listening ear. He didn't just pour whiskey, he poured warmth. But sometimes, late at night, when the laughter dimmed and conversation gave way to silence, strange things happened. A chair would rock by itself. A candle would flicker, though there was no draft. And once, when old Mr. Davis began weeping over the son he'd lost in the mines, a glass gently slid toward him, refilled without a word. He stared at it, trembling, before whispering, "Thank you, Martha." No one corrected him. No one laughed, because deep down, they all felt it too, that someone unseen was still tending to broken hearts. It was a night of hard rain when a stranger appeared. Tall, thin, and weary, his coat soaked through and his boots heavy with mud. He pushed the door open and stood in the threshold like a ghost returned from the road. "Evenin'," Eli said, drying a mug. "Storm caught you?" The man nodded, voice rough. "Been walking from Kansas City. Name's Samuel Grant." Eli poured him a whiskey and slid it across the bar. Before Samuel could reach for it, the glass moved, slowly, surely, right to his fingertips. Samuel froze. "How?" Eli only smiled, eyes soft. "You're in Missouri Valley, son." "Things here have a way of finding who needs them," Samuel drank. It burned, but the warmth went deeper than whiskey ever could. Samuel was a violinist, not a great one, but a soulful one. He played for food, for shelter, sometimes just for silence. When Eli offered him a corner by the fireplace in exchange for nightly tunes, he accepted. Each evening his bow danced slow and low, filling the tavern with the kind of music that felt like memory. His songs had no words, but every note told of longing and loss. After one such tune, Eli asked quietly, "You ever play for someone you loved and lost?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "Her name was Lila. We were supposed to marry. She died in a fire back in Kansas City." The room fell still. Outside, thunder rolled. Then, one by one, glasses along the counter began to refill themselves. Eli didn't look surprised. He only whispered, "Then she's still listening." And Samuel, who hadn't cried in 2 years, finally did. Behind the counter, hidden under a loose floorboard, lay a wooden box wrapped in linen. Inside was a photograph of Martha Turner, laughing, young, with flour on her hands from the bakery she once ran. Beside it rested a folded note, written in her gentle script, "Don't stop serving kindness, Eli. Even when I'm gone, keep the light alive." After her passing, Eli read those words every night before closing the tavern. And the first night he did. The glasses moved. At first he thought it was grief playing tricks, but then he heard it, her voice, faint and soft, saying, Pour them another, Eli. They need warmth tonight. That was the night. The whispering barrel began to truly live. One late evening, Samuel was cleaning up when he heard something. A woman's voice humming, low and mournful, coming from beneath the floor. He froze. The tune was familiar, the same lullaby he'd heard Eli hum to himself when the tavern grew quiet. He crept closer to the cellar door. The humming stopped. Then came a whisper, clear, kind, and haunting. Pour them another, Eli. They've lost too much already. Samuel stumbled back, heart pounding. He told Eli what he'd heard. The old man only smiled sadly. That's just the house remembering love, he said. But that night, Samuel couldn't sleep. Because love, in his experience, didn't whisper from under the floorboards. Days passed before Samuel gathered courage to ask, Eli, what really happens here? Who's pouring the drinks? Eli kept cleaning the same glass over and over, eyes distant. You ever love someone so much that when they left, the world refused to let them go? Samuel nodded. I think so. Eli looked up, tears glistening in his tired eyes. Then you understand. Martha built this place with me. Every board, every barrel, every shelf has her touch. She was the heart of it. And I reckon the heart doesn't just stop because the body does. Samuel didn't press further. But that night, when the lamps dimmed and the drinks began to pour themselves again, he whispered, Evening, Mrs. Turner. The faint scent of roses filled the air. The next storm brought more than rain. It brought a man broken by the world. He stumbled in drenched and shivering, muttering curses. Flood took everything, my farm, my wife. Even my dog Eli poured a drink and slid it across the counter. I don't need your pity, the man barked. He pushed the glass away. But then the glass moved again. Slowly, returning to him, refilled with amber light. He stared at it, jaw trembling. Eli spoke softly. Maybe it ain't pity. Maybe it's mercy. The man lifted the drink, took a shaky sip and set it down. Then buried his face in his hands and wept. The tavern stayed silent. No one mocked him. No one moved. Because everyone, in their own way, had come there to be forgiven by something unseen. By the time summer rolled around, the story of the tavern where drinks poured themselves spread across 3 counties. Farmers came with their wives, travelers stopped on their way west, and even a preacher once visited to see the devil's work. He left whispering prayers of peace. Eli never tried to profit from it. He didn't advertise, didn't raise prices. If a man was hungry, he ate. If he was lonely, he found company. If he was broken, the tavern mended him, in quiet, unseen ways. Some nights, when the river breeze blew through the windows, the air shimmered faintly, and the drinks moved before anyone asked. People swore they heard laughter, not mocking but motherly, gentle, as if Martha herself was saying, It's all right. You're safe here. For all the tavern's comfort, Samuel carried a wound that no amount of kindness could soothe. His younger sister, Mary, had died in that Kansas City factory fire. While he was playing music across town, he had promised her he'd take her away from that life, but he never did. One night, after everyone had left, Samuel sat alone at the bar, his violin resting before him. He whispered, If you're out there, Mary, I'm sorry. The room fell utterly still. Then the violin, motionless seconds ago, slid toward him. Its bow lifted slightly, as if held by unseen fingers, and drew a single trembling note. Samuel gasped, tears falling freely. Eli watched from behind the counter, voice low and reverent. She hears you, son. Some souls never stop listening. From that night on, Samuel's music changed. It wasn't sorrow anymore, it was hope. And when he played, even the drinks seemed to move in rhythm. The Missouri spring came cruel and restless that year. Rain fell for 9 straight days, drumming against the tavern roof like a dirge. The river swelled past its banks, flooding fields and swallowing fences. The people of Missouri Valley watched the rising waters with dread. Eli stood on his porch, hat in hand, staring at the muddy torrent creeping closer. Behind him, Samuel packed what he could: the violin, some food, the cash box. "We've got to leave, Eli," he pleaded. "The river's coming for the valley." But Eli just looked out at the tavern sign swinging in the wind. The Whispering Barrel. He sighed softly. "Martha always said the river gives what it takes. If it means to take me, I'll let it." Samuel grabbed his arm. "You can't die for a building." Eli smiled faintly. "I'm not dying for a building, son. I'm staying for a promise." That night, as thunder shook the earth, the tavern's lights burned brighter than they ever had, as if refusing to be drowned. The storm hit with a fury no man had seen before. The river broke free, roaring down the valley like a beast unleashed. The tavern shuddered as water poured in under the doors. Inside, Eli lit every lantern, turning the room into a sanctuary of golden light. He poured drinks for the last time, one for every soul he remembered. Old Mr. Davis, the widow Ann, the travelers who came lost and left whole. Samuel begged him to flee. "You'll drown." Eli just smiled. "No, son. I'll just go home." As the water climbed the stairs, glasses began to move on their own, aligning in a perfect line across the counter, filling and refilling without end. The whole room seemed alive, as if the tavern itself were saying farewell. Eli took one final look at the photograph of Martha above the fireplace. "You kept your promise, love," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." Lightning struck. The roof gave way, and the Whispering Barrel Tavern was swallowed by the river. When dawn came, the flood had claimed half the valley. Samuel awoke on a muddy bank, his violin clutched to his chest, the tavern gone. He rose on trembling legs and looked across the endless water. There, where the tavern had stood, the surface shimmered strangely, as if lit from below. Without thinking, he lifted his violin and began to play. The melody rose and fell like the breath of the river, a song for the lost, for the brave, for the ones who poured love into a weary world. Farmers and townsfolk gathered on the hill, listening. Some swore they heard another sound beneath his music. A woman's voice, humming along. That night, when the last note faded, Samuel whispered, "Rest easy, Eli." The house kept its promise. The floodwaters began to recede, leaving behind debris, broken homes, and silence. The townspeople mourned their losses, but none more deeply than the tavern. To many, it had been more than a bar. It had been a heart that kept the valley warm. Weeks later, while walking by the river, Samuel found a piece of wood lodged in the reeds. It was the tavern's old sign, still bearing the faded words, "The Whispering Barrel, established 1892. He lifted it from the mud, tears streaming down his face. The scent of whiskey and roses still clung faintly to it. "She's gone," he murmured, "but she ain't forgotten." That night he placed the sign by his bedside and promised to rebuild, not just the walls, but the spirit that once filled them. A month after the flood, as Samuel helped with cleanup along the riverbank, one of the men shouted, "Hey Grant, you'll want to see this." They had found a sealed barrel, perfectly intact, floating near the old bend. The name E. Turner was carved into it. When Samuel pried it open, expecting whiskey, he found something else, dry parchment wrapped in oilskin. Inside was a handwritten note. "Kindness is the only drink that refills itself. If you ever rebuild, let it be for them, the broken, the lonely, the forgotten." Eli Turner, Samuel fell to his knees. Around him, the other men removed their hats, and in that moment, as sunlight pierced the river mist, they all swore they heard the clinking of unseen glasses, as if the tavern itself was raising one last toast. The following winter, Samuel began rebuilding. Not the old tavern exactly. He didn't have the means or the manpower, but a small, humble house with a single counter and a few stools. He named it Martha's Light. He played his violin there every night, just as he once did for Eli, and people came, not for the drink, but for the peace. He kept Eli's note framed on the wall. Beneath it stood one empty glass that was never touched. Each night before closing, he would fill it halfway, whisper a prayer, and leave it there. Sometimes, when he turned his back, he'd find the glass empty. He never told anyone why that made him smile. Years passed, and Samuel grew older, his hair turning silver like moonlight. Yet his hands remained steady, his bow graceful as ever. One quiet autumn evening, a young woman came in, travel-worn, pale, with sorrow in her eyes. She sat down and said softly, "I heard there's a place where the drinks pour themselves." Samuel chuckled. "You heard right, but it only happens when the heart's honest." She told him her story, of a brother lost in the mines, of nights spent alone with nothing but grief. Samuel listened, then poured her a drink. For a long moment it sat still, then, slowly, it slid toward her across the counter. The girl gasped. "How?" Samuel smiled. "Some kindnesses never die. They just find new hands." That night, she sang with him, and for the first time in years the tavern felt alive again. From then on, travelers came to Martha's Light the same way they once came to the Whispering Barrel, quietly, humbly, seeking warmth rather than whiskey. Sometimes the glass would move. Sometimes it wouldn't. But each person left lighter than they came. Samuel would tell them stories of Eli, of Martha, of the night the river took everything but love. And when storms rolled across the valley, thunder echoing through the hills, the tavern would creak softly, as if answering. Samuel would nod toward the ceiling and whisper, "Evenin', Eli. Still pourin', I see." And maybe, just maybe, he was. By the 1940s, few original townsfolk remained, but the legend endured. Children grew up hearing about the tavern where drinks poured themselves. Some dismissed it as folklore. Others, the ones who had truly lost, believed every word. When Samuel passed, he left behind two things: his violin and a sealed envelope. Inside was a short message. "If you ever hear music on a stormy night, don't be afraid. It's just an old friend pouring one more round." After his burial, Martha's Light stood empty for years, but neighbors swore they saw a glow from within on certain nights. And when the wind blew from the river, it carried the faint sound of laughter and a single violin note. In 1958, 50 years after the flood, a construction crew digging near the old riverbank found something buried beneath layers of silt and time. The foundation stones of the Whispering Barrel Tavern. Among them lay a perfectly preserved oak sign, its letters still visible. The Whispering Barrel, where every soul finds its pour. As they lifted it, one of the men, a skeptic by nature, felt his flask grow warm in his pocket. He pulled it out and gasped. The whiskey inside was swirling on its own, golden and alive. The crew fell silent. Then the foreman, a gruff man with gray whiskers, whispered, "Guess the old place still knows when a man's heart is heavy." That evening, as they shared a drink by the river, one of the glasses gently tipped and refilled itself. Just once. And for a heartbeat, all of them heard it. A woman's laughter carried on the breeze, soft and kind. The legend of the tavern, where drinks poured themselves, lived on. not as a ghost story, but as a reminder. Kindness never dies. It just finds a new vessel.